Welcome back. In this video, we're going to take a look at the switch statement, which is another way that we can modify the control flow of our program. To begin, let's create a new project in NetBeans. And at least on my end, I'm going to get rid of all of these comments. To demonstrate the power of the switch statement, we're going to start by writing a program using only if blocks. Then we'll convert the program to one that uses switch statements. To begin, let's simply declare a variable x. And here's our goal. If the value of x is 1, 2, or 3, we'd like to print out the responses red, blue, or green, respectively. If x is not one of those numbers, we'll just print out a default response. Doing this with if blocks is pretty straightforward, if not a little tedious. If x equals 1, system.out.println red. And then we'll pretty much just copy and paste this block of code and modify it for the blue and green cases. For our default case, we simply want to check that x is not equal to 1, x is not equal to 2, and x is not equal to 3. Let's give our program a very quick run through, and we get the expected results. This is a simplified version of something we might logically find ourselves doing in the course of writing a bigger program. While we put together this at a pretty decent clip, it's easy to see how this problem would become extremely unwieldy if we were dealing with many possible cases of x. And it's also pretty difficult for someone to read and figure out what's going on here. The solution, as you've probably guessed, is to use a switch statement to control our program's flow instead. When we want to execute different lines or blocks of code, depending on the value of an individual variable, the switch statement is extremely effective. Let's now rewrite our series of if blocks using a switch statement instead. The syntax looks like this. We first declare that we're going to use a switch statement, switch being a reserved keyword in Java. And then we provide the name of the variable that we'd like the switch statement to act on. In this case, x, because we're going to execute different blocks of code depending on the value of x. Then, just like we were using an if or an else statement, we're going to create a new segment of code using 2 brackets. Now, instead of creating a series of unwieldy if blocks, we create separate blocks in our switch statement using the case keyword. After each case keyword, we give a prescribed value, and the following code will execute if the value of x matches with the value of the case keyword. So, just like when we were doing our if blocks, if the value of x is 1, we'd like to print out red. Writing separate cases for each of the possible values now becomes much cleaner and easier to read. Switch statements also have a special case, the default case, which we pretty much always put at the end of a switch statement. This case will only execute if none of the other cases have executed. And it means that we don't have to write that complicated Boolean logic for our last if block. If we run this program, we're actually going to see every possible output execute. That's because we've forgotten to do something very important. Switch statements allow us to create complicated logic trees because once a case starts executing, it will continue to execute, even through following cases. Because we're writing a very simple program where we only want a single case to execute, we need to explicitly end the execution once we enter a case and finish the code. We do that with the break keyword, which exists on a line of code all by itself and simply steps us up and out of the case that we're in. Now, if we run our program, we'll see the expected results. In addition to falling through from one case to another, we can increase the complexity and the power of our switch statements by adding multiple cases on a single line. Because the cases freely fall through to each other, doing something like case 1, case 5, case 7 means that this block of code will execute if we provide the number 1, 5, or 7. So there's the quick and easy of switch statements. One comment before we go though. Switch statements essentially compare the variable or explicit value we're switching and the cases using the equality operator. If elements cannot be compared with the equality operator, the switch statement will not work properly. As of Java SE version 7, you can compare strings with the equality operator, and so you can use them in switch statements. This was not always the case, and it's often still a good idea to avoid using strings with the equality operator and in your switch statements because it destroys the backwards compatibility of the code you're writing. Thanks for watching.